Sup, freaks? This is your boy Marty here to introduce this episode of Tales from the Crypt. Getting this one out immediately due to the timely matter of the subject at hand, which is COVID-19 and hydroxychloroquine. I sat down with Dr. James Todaro, who's been doing a lot of research on hydroxychloroquine as a treatment for COVID-19. He has been through an interesting journey since the middle of March. It includes censorship, name-calling, and people coming at his reputation, medical journal reports that have been retracted that were against his stance, a bunch of crazy things. There's erotic models involved in this story. I think you guys are really going to like this podcast. This is an eye-opener and really drives home the fact that you should don't trust, verify. Make sure that you're verifying everything, not only in Bitcoin, but in everything that you do in life, on every subject. This episode of Tales from the Crypt is brought to you by our good friends at the Cash App. You freaks already know all about them. They're helping you stack sats. They're helping you send sats. They're helping you receive sats. They'll help you sell sats if you want to. Hopefully you don't have to, but if you want to or have to, you can do it via the app as well. On top of that, they're making sats to standard. And when you make sats to standard, you can then DCA into Bitcoin using the Cash App as well. They have a DCA function. You can set auto buys up so that you can just set it and forget it. On top of that, they're letting you stock slivers of stonks. Listen, I know some of you don't want to stock slivers of stonks. I just have to let you know that the option is there. All right. What is a sliver of a stonk? It's not a whole stonk. If your favorite stonk, if you do invest in stonks and that's your thing, that's your prerogative, and you have a stonk that you're looking at, it's a little too expensive out of your price range, can't buy a whole stonk, Cash App's letting you buy a sliver of that stonk as little as $1. Because Cash App is directly connected to your bank account, or it may even be your bank account. Did you know that they have accounting numbers or routing numbers now, and you can start direct depositing paychecks into the Cash App? Well, if you didn't, now you know. And because the Cash App's directly connected to your bank account, or it is your bank account, there's no 4 to 5 day waiting periods. You start stacking sats and investing today. You should know that Cash App Investing is a subsidiary of Square, member SIPC. As always, make sure you use the code STACKINGSATS. That's STACKINGSATS. One word. One word. One word. Stacking Sats. When you download the app, if you haven't done so already, you're going to get $10, and $10 is going to go to our good friends, Owls Lacrosse. That's Owls Lacrosse. I had one of these hanging out my window this morning, so I got some practice in. Woo, 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 woo. Use the code STACKINGSATS. Download the Cash App today, and I hope you guys really take in this episode with Dr. James Todaro. Fascinating conversation, fascinating story. We live in some pretty crazy times. Take care.
You've had a dynamic where money's become freer than free.
If you talk about a Fed just gone nuts, all the central banks going nuts.
So it's all acting like safe haven.
I believe that in a world where central bankers are tripping over themselves to devalue their currency, Bitcoin wins. In the world of fiat currencies, Bitcoin is the victor.
I mean, that's part of the bull case for Bitcoin.
If you're not paying attention, you probably should be.
There we go. What is up, freaks? Welcome back to Tales from the Crypt. It's your boy Marty Bent here on a lovely Friday morning. Very excited for this conversation. The topic we're about to cover is very controversial. This conversation is going to cover controversy, censorship, manipulating data, false data, the downfall of a multi-century-year-old medical journal, and weird hysteria that has taken over the world. I'd like to introduce you freaks to Dr. James Todaro. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Marty. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. So the subject of today is hydroxychloroquine. Your research on the drug and how it pertains to COVID-19, particularly whether or not it is a drug that is helpful for patients suffering from COVID-19. And in mid-March, you dropped a report with your partner, Gregory, that basically said the hydroxychloroquine, could be used to treat COVID-19 patients with some success. That started a whole bunch of controversy, and we'll get into that. But before we do that, let's just lay some groundwork. Why don't you introduce yourself, explain your medical background, and your cryptocurrency background as well at Blocktown.
Sure. Thanks for that. So I received my medical degree from Columbia University in New York back in 2014. It was actually my last year of medical school that I first started investing in Bitcoin. And it kind of goes along with the narrative that, I have right now is kind of censorship. The exciting thing about Bitcoin was censorship resistance, and now it's kind of medicine uncensored. But after I finished medical school, I did my residency in Detroit, 4 years in ophthalmology, so eye surgery. And then it was actually immediately after residency that I stepped away from clinical medicine entirely, just to focus on managing cryptocurrency Bitcoin investments. Obviously still paid a lot of attention to medicine, which is why COVID-19 caught my eye in January. It looked like it was going to be a tidal wave hitting Europe and the US, just based on kind of my experience in epidemiology and the way these viruses work. And so in March, or actually late February, just through some kind of investigative analysis, there was a medication that was really not discussed really almost anywhere at the time, and that was chloroquine, or its closely related derivative, hydroxychloroquine. And what, I was very familiar with the drug because in ophthalmology, we screen patients all the time who take hydroxychloroquine for lupus or rheumatoid arthritis because it can have some visual side effects. So I was very familiar with the medication. It's been shown before to have antiviral properties. It was actually mentioned in an article about 15 years ago regarding SARS-1. And there was in vitro evidence of it having an effect against the virus in primate cells. And there was guidelines coming out of South Korea and China where it sounded like they were using it. So there basically was a picture. And I think Greg, who co-authored the paper with me, he had been doing research on hydroxychloroquine, and its antiviral effects for over a decade. So he was very familiar with the mechanism of action. We teamed together and put together what, in my mind, was a proposal to look at this drug to see if it could be, as effective as it might be, because it's a widely available drug, super cheap, known safety profile. It could be the perfect candidate for treating this disease, either as a prophylactic or in treatment of COVID-19. So we put out that paper, and it was tweeted out by Elon Musk, I think within 24 hours, which is really kind of a big step up for the publicity of my Twitter account, which is where we put it out there. I think I had about 9,000 followers at the time, and it's been off to the races ever since.
Yeah, you're up to like 35,000 now.
Yeah. So then my colleague Greg went on Laura Ingram and discussed what was kind of just breaking, not only just our paper, but now there was a study coming out in France that showed that it was effective in actual patients with COVID-19 in Europe. And once we broke that news, then my co-author went on Tucker Carlson, discussed those study results, and then the following day, the president's mentioning it in a presser, and it's been a controversial subject ever since.
To say the least. And so, yeah, you guys put this out in March, and people started attacking you right away, coming at you for being an eye doctor, scaring people away from hydroxychloroquine because it wasn't tested, even though it has been around for a year and it's a generic drug. And I was telling you before we hit record, my cousin has lupus and she takes it every day, and she seems pretty healthy and fine. Why? And on top of that, so you guys had like an open shared Google Doc that got censored as well at one point.
Yeah, correct? So there's kind of a couple different directions to go. We could maybe touch a little bit more on the censorship, but yeah, the Google document was taken down, which was pretty incredible. I didn't even know they really do that for Google documents. One thing is like maybe a tweet or a YouTube video or a Facebook video, but a Google document, that's kind of surprising. They never explained to me why they took it down either. But yeah, it was really amazing. Twitter, I would say, overall has been extremely, in my experience at least, positive. They always have the trolls, the negative people, but like you listen to the people that are smart, that are contributing helpful information. But the mainstream media is where the real attacking and kind of name calling actually came from. The Huffington Post put out an article that called us hucksters. I'm not I was just a physician who's an entrepreneur who put this out there, but and then the Washington Post hit it, and so you had all the kind of mainstream media attacking it, saying that this medication all of a sudden went from what rheumatologists call a daily vitamin for patients with lupus or rheumatoid arthritis. It became almost the most dangerous medication in the U.S., all in a matter of a week. It first started off where there's dangerous side effects for your vision. That was the first thing that everyone started talking about, which it's true. One of the side effects can be vision loss, but that takes 5 years of taking this medication usually before that happens. And so as an ophthalmologist, I was able to quickly dispel that myth, and the American Academy of Ophthalmology came to the table and said, okay, look, in a short course, this isn't really a real side effect. The next thing that was focused was bigger even. It has cardiac side effects. This will cause cardiac death in you. And it's true. It prolongs a interval on your EKG. You hear the spikes, the ups and downs. There's a certain interval. If it gets too long, it can cause your heart to essentially go into an arrhythmia, which means it's not beating regularly, and you can die from that. Extremely rare. This is a medication that's been prescribed, billions of doses throughout the last 65 years. It's very, very rare to have cardiac death from it. Most rheumatologists won't even do an EKG on you when they start you on this medication. Yet, if you were to listen to the way this medication is described in the media, it sounds like, oh my gosh, if I take this, my heart's going to stop. I mean, people were genuinely concerned. I don't know, genuinely concerned, but they were supposedly concerned that Trump was going to die from taking this medication for 2 weeks. This malarial prophylactic, and one of the most common medications for lupus. You're going to die from a 2-week course under medical supervision. It's ridiculous.
It's completely asinine. That's where my main question lies right now. Was this a concerted effort from a big pharma interest to stop this generic drug because it's not very profitable for the people making it, or was it the media just stubbornly trying to disagree with everything that Donald Trump does and supports?
Yeah, that's probably the $100 billion question right now. Is what is going on behind the scenes that is kind of driving all this energy and propaganda, I would say. It's tough. It's tough to know what goes on behind the scenes, and I don't even know if I want to know, honestly. Yeah, it's crazy. You have on the one hand, you have people say, "Oh, well, the media is just attacking it because Trump, talked highly of it, so that's why they're attacking it." But there's also very big, there's big pharma interest behind the scenes. You have Gilead, who has a competing drug, remdesivir, and you have almost 20% of the National Institute of Health task force making recommendations on COVID-19. 20% of them work for or invested in Gilead. So you have direct conflicts of interest that kind of merge between politics and big pharma. So you might not even be able to separate those two. Maybe it's a combination. I don't know, but there's a lot of forces going on, I think, behind the scene.
Yeah, because you had Fauci come out against it at one point, the World Health Organization come out against it, and it's so confusing. This whole COVID-19 thing has been extremely confusing for me as an individual, and I'm sure for many other people out there.
I can imagine.
And so let's focus on the virus for a little bit. It's a novel coronavirus. It's new. We're learning about it on the fly. What's your perspective as a doctor at this given point in time? How much do we know about the virus? Were expectations overblown in the beginning? Is it as bad as previously thought, or are there still too many unknowns?
I think there are obviously still unknowns, but we know a lot more than I think we knew 2 months ago. So Basically, the three questions that came to my mind back in January when it looked like this was going to be a big deal is, how infectious is this virus? If it's highly infectious, then it's probably going to spread to the world very rapidly. There's a lot of travel. Number two is, how lethal is this actually? What's the actual fatality rate of this disease? At China at the time, it looked like people were just falling dead in the street, and there's just videos of them laying there, with like a movie style theme where just like blood coming out of their mouth, and that's that. And then number three was, is there a treatment or prophylactic that can either stop the infection or reduce the fatality of it? And so back in that time, the only answer that seemed clear to me was that it's highly infectious. So then the question is, what about the other two things? Regarding treatment, we can, whatever. I'll talk about that real quickly. There's a lot of misconceptions on, I think, hydroxychloroquine on both sides of the aisle, whether you're for or against it. So I just want to get that out of the way, I guess, right now. So for people that are pro hydroxychloroquine, in medicine, it's very rare to have something that is a magical cure or a bulletproof prophylactic. There's, it usually will reduce your chances of getting infection, or it will decrease the severity of the illness, particularly when it comes to antivirals, which is what hydroxychloroquine is serving in this particular use case. And so, it's not, I don't think there's a magic bullet, something that could help. And we're still kind of looking at randomized controlled trials as they come out on that. The one thing I'd say is we've been studying it all wrong. And by we, I mean the big organizations have been looking at in late treatment of COVID-19 in hospitalized patients, which I've been saying since March, that's not going to be effective. You have to do it early. That's the only way to stand a chance. On the other side of the spectrum, like we already talked about, so I won't go into much more, is this medication is unlikely to harm you, I think, much more than maybe the potential it helps you. Those are kind of two different sides of that coin, because I get asked that a lot. Regarding the fatality of the disease, though, now that's I'd say that's the other big question. And so I tweeted out about a month and a half ago because someone asked me that, and I was, at this point we don't really know the true fatality rate of this disease, but my suspicion is it's going to turn out to be highly infectious and not that fatal. And this kind of makes sense, and it's possible that the virus even evolved that way because the virus essentially succeeds by infecting other people. So the ideal virus from the virus's standpoint is to actually not get you super sick, because it wants you still going to work. It wants you hopping on that plane. It wants you going to family birthday parties. So you have to be well enough to go to those things, and then you can cough and touch things and spread the disease, and then the virus spreads. That's how it continues to kind of infected one. A virus that just kills you right away, that it doesn't give you, or makes you really sick, it doesn't have time to spread. So I think there's a chance that it already even mutated and became less fatal, which led Joey Krug actually and I put out, as well as Dr. Zelenko, but we put out a article back in April. It was our second report, saying that it was basically time to reopen America. That the fatality rate of this was not really the 3 to 4% that the World Health Organization was saying, but it was actually, I think, lower at around 0.2%. And we put that out April 23rd, and it was just late last month, the CDC came out with their own report saying, it looks like the infection fatality rate is actually about 0.25%. And so now I think we have a much better handle on the fatality rate of this, and since April, and so that's kind of why we proposed opening up.
Yeah, and yet the country isn't open unless you're protesting. It's been crazy to see how quickly the fear mongering around the virus has dissipated and basically disappeared within 10 days with all this rioting and protesting. I
actually tweeted that out. Maybe it was like a week and a half ago. I said, governors, they're still trying to keep people locked down for the summer. It's a losing battle. There's just no way you're going to be able to accomplish that. I mean, people want to be outside, especially if they don't have to necessarily maybe go to work. In a lot of cases, they're going to want to be outside. I didn't anticipate the protests, so that was obviously a whole different element that got people out there.
Yeah, well, and that's another big question that's going around. At least my family and people I'm talking to about this is the the second wave. People point to the Spanish flu about 100 years ago, and there was a second wave there that caused a lot more damage than the initial outbreak. Fauci came out, I believe, last week and backpedaled from the second wave narrative a little bit.
He did.
What are your thoughts on a second wave? Is this virus actually comparable to the Spanish flu in the way that those waves worked?
There is so it's a little bit tough. There's not actually a clear answer in my mind. If I were to make an educated guess, I would say the virus will begin infecting more people in the fall. But again, I think the infection fatality rate will probably be low, maybe even lower than the past couple months. And so it won't be as deadly as I think a lot of people think when they think of the Spanish flu, when you're talking about like total number of deaths. I don't think it will be as many, but that's something that like I closely watch. And so as we enter September, I think it's very important to watch those metrics to see, because I think there's going to be a lot of fear mongering again. It'll be very easy to say, oh my gosh, the infections are increasing. This is, and everyone's always like, the death count's going to skyrocket in the next 2 to 3 weeks and 2 to 3 weeks. And so, I think that's very likely to happen, at least the fear. The question will be, is it real or not? And I think that's going to come with the data. And I think we'll be making an educated guess on that pretty early.
Yeah. Like people are waiting for the second wave now with the protesting. Like, well, no, 2 weeks. It's like,
I don't think there's going to be a huge second wave from these protests, but we'll see.
Yeah. It's weird. And that's the thing that's been so confusing to me throughout all this, is like how much does the fear-driven media really affect our view of this virus and really disturb our true understanding of this virus, particularly, and just viruses in nature, just how they actually work. Like the common cold is a coronavirus. People get it pretty consistently year in, year out. The flu was pretty terrible this year, and am I going to get canceled if I say this, but is it sort of similar to a flu with the with the death rate?
Your Twitter account. So that's what Joey Kirk and I put out there, is you basically said, going forward, based on this new infection fatality rate we came up with, this is comparable to essentially a bad flu, which is 2017, 2018 was a particularly bad year of flu. I think the mortality and the fatality rate was, I think, 0.16%. And so we're calculating just a little bit higher than that, which the flu, so we have governors, like governor in California, Newsom, was sitting there saying, you can't open up a county if you have a single death within the past 2 weeks. And so people went from this idea of flattening the curve, which is everything we heard in March and April, to this idea of, we won't have another death. And that's unrealistic. I mean, we don't have that mentality with the flu. So why are we having that mentality with the coronavirus? And they backpacked very quickly. Like Governor Newsom changed that part of the rule for entering the second stage of opening up pretty quickly, because it was absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, I think there's a good chance that this fatality rate at this point going forward could be very similar to a bad flu season.
Yeah. And
with the exception that it doesn't actually affect kids that much. So the flu, right, it, affects that under 5 in that elderly range, whereas this really seems to just be focused on the elderly and nursing homes.
Yeah, which highlights another inconsistency with sort of people in control, like the governors, particularly like here in Jersey and New York. I believe more people died in nursing homes than the rest of the country combined.
Nursing home deaths, it's been tragic. Some states, I think Connecticut, something like 80% of the deaths in Connecticut were in nursing homes. That's the thing, that we spend so much time on this quarantining the whole population and fighting over who's social distancing, who's wearing masks, if you're allowed out of your house, if you're allowed to go to the beach, can you go to the park or not? That no one was really paying attention to where it kind of really mattered, and the vulnerable people who actually had no control over their own environment, which is the nursing homes. They were just kind of ignored.
Yeah, and you had Cuomo and Governor Fox here in New Jersey send
Yeah.
recovering COVID patients to nursing homes
Yep.
because they didn't want to put them in hospitals.
Right.
Like it's
Yep.
and nobody brings this up in the media.
No, of course
or
not.
wants to
Of
hold
course
them
not.
accountable for this.
Of course not. It's not the favorable narrative.
No, that's like the narrative. The 2020 narrative machine has been something to wonder at. Like it's insane what's going on. So let's dive into this study out of thin air where they really tried to drive the narrative that hydroxychloroquine is a bad drug that shouldn't be used for COVID-19. It was the name of the paper is hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine with or without a macrolide for treatment of COVID-19, a multinational registry analysis. And this was released by a company named Surgisphere that popped up out of nowhere recently. And you and other independent researchers sort of debunked this research pretty quickly. Let's dive into the whole story.
Yeah.
Who's pushing this narrative, and the people involved, like the Lancet, where this was published, is a very respected medical journal, correct?
Yeah. So this was a study that was released on May 22nd, and it was published in the Lancet, which is an almost 200-year-old medical journal. So, not every, the way studies work is, the authors will put together a study and then submit it to a journal, and it goes through a peer review process where a dozen or more experts in that specific field will review the paper to make sure that the data is correct, that the study conclusions are correct, and basically that the whole thing is almost verified in a way. And so there's good journals, and there's, and this is just from the academics' way of looking at it. There's kind of good journals, and there's poor journals, and so everyone is aiming to get like the best journal possible. So the Lancet is arguably the best medical journal, one of the best medical journals in the world. You have the New England Journal of Medicine as well, which is really great, which they also are relevant in this story, which I'll bring up later. And so you have this, so when physicians or scientists see an article published in the Lancet, that's almost like God's word. That was like the stamp of approval by the most professional journal in the space. And so when that study came out on May 22nd, it was really immediately, you had all these blue check marks on Twitter, and the professionals, the academics. So they say, see, we told you hydroxychloroquine is dangerous and it's killing people, because the study came out showing that it increased your risk of dying in hospitalized patients. And it was a study of 96,000 patients. So an observational study with 96,000 patients, about 15,000 of them received treatment with either hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine. When they say macrolide in that title, that just kind of basically mostly means azithromycin, but there's other medications as well. And so very quickly, the World Health Organization, which had been opposed, had kind of been biased against hydroxychloroquine, I would say from the beginning, over a weekend after deliberating on this study, so the study came out on a Friday, by Monday they announced they were stopping all clinical trials on hydroxychloroquine in about 17 different countries, and was actually, trying to convince countries to stop doing the clinical studies on hydroxychloroquine because they said it was harmful. Over a 72-hour period. So it was a study that had a lot of impact on a lot of physicians, researchers across the world, and the way patients were cared for. The study was very peculiar to a lot of us who were doing independent research, as you said, on hydroxychloroquine. Because first of all, it was very odd that this actually doubled your risk of mortality. I could see it not having an effect in patients treated with COVID, treated late with hydroxychloroquine for COVID-19, but to actually double your risk of dying seemed not in line with other articles. In addition to that, the first tip-off was the data didn't really make sense, right? So first of all, certain baseline characteristics of the populations that were in the study didn't really line up with the kind of known baseline characteristics for those particular continents. But that was kind of soft, right? You can't really say, oh, a study is fake because, the numbers don't seem the baseline characteristics. Maybe certain people had more risk. And so there's a lot of confounding variables for that. But the other thing that really kind of came to light was they said that this study had 73 deaths in Australia by April 21st, which is when they kind of concluded the study following patients. And if you look at the Johns Hopkins database, the COVID tracking project, there's only 67 deaths in Australia at the time. So it was actually physically impossible for them to have data on that many patients because they didn't exist. The authors in the Lancet quickly came out in about a day or two, a response saying, oh, we accidentally had the wrong hospital located in Australia. That's actually part of Asia. And so that's why we had the extra deaths in Australia. Nothing to see here. Small change, but the conclusions of the study are no different. That really convinced me that there was more going on behind this study and that the data was probably just entirely fabricated. And so that's when I took a deep dive into the study. And so there's kind of two sides. There's more evidence that the data didn't make sense. That's kind of nitty gritty and boring. So maybe I don't know if your listeners want me to go into that too much. But the other things, but the data was all hidden in this black box of this company called Surgisphere. This was because people when the Australia information came out, they're saying, okay, well, show us the data now. You already made one mistake. You kind of failed that one. So now we want to review the data ourselves. And the author said, oh no, this data is in Surgisphere. This company, they're the ones that analyze it. We can't expose it to the public because of agreements, this and that. And so I was like, okay, well, let me look at Surgisphere since that's who we're apparently supposed to trust in this whole study. And the further I went into Surgisphere, the more unbelievable the story became. First off, you go to their website. It's it looks like an ICO website. A lot of flashy words, diagrams. It's machine learning, artificial intelligence, case studies, no real research. So for this massive database that claimed that they had data on 240 million patient encounters, partnerships with 1,200 hospitals in like 45 different countries. There's no research that they really published besides one study earlier, about 3 weeks earlier. But the rest of it were just kind of hyping up the use cases for their project. That was a little bit fishy. But then it was, okay, let me look at the team. All right, so what they're claiming to build requires software engineers. It requires physicians, a PR team, a lot of business people to make these partnerships and collect all this data, analyze it, go through it. Huge team over many months. They had one person on their website. It was just the founder, this Dr. Sapan Desai guy, who was also an author of the study. And so I was like, well, okay, let me see who else. Maybe on LinkedIn or something, there's a bigger team. So I go to LinkedIn under Surgisphere. They have their own little company profile on there. And there's 5 employees. So again, the founder, a medical doctor in Chicago, I believe, that area. And then there's a VP of business development, and then I think a VP of sales and marketing, who just joined the company 2 months ago. Both of them, as well as 2 science freelance writers, basically. So 4 other people all just joined the company 2 to 3 months ago. One of them, the VP of business, looks like he's still working for another company. So obviously not a full-time team that is looking to, that is analyzing all this data. Then if you go look at, so then I was like, okay, well, let me look at their subsidiary companies. Maybe they have other companies that have teams and stuff. So, I looked up, they have, Surgical Outcomes Collaborative, Vascular Outcomes. There's nothing on the internet about those 2 essentially. And then there's another one called Quartz Clinical, which is kind of it has a little bit more presence online. There's a video out, a promotional video. It's one of those videos that's kind of shot like a trade show with a little bit like a professional camera where it has the founder sitting there in front of his booth saying, talking highly of Surgisphere. And then it goes to what comes up on the screen as Surgisphere Director of Sales. And it's this young woman talking about her, what she's done at Surgisphere in a very professional way and everything. And this actually came from my followers. I got a lot of messages about this, but she was actually just an adult model for hire, and not only that, but she's actually like it's erotic, man. And I got a lot of DMs about that. I was like, I can't look at it anymore. But
what the hell is going on?
So it was like, wow, okay. And then it's like just the whole, and then if you look in the Internet Archives for Surgisphere, because I was like, okay, well, what is this company actually like? What have they been saying in the past? It's weird. The response is, sorry, this web page has been excluded from the Wayback Machine, which is very different from a website that simply says, we don't have, information on this site, as in they didn't collect it. But this one is actually excluded. And so I did some researching on that, and it looks like the company there has to request it removed or try to hide it with, hide from the crawlers in some way. And so it's a lot of sketchy things that went on. That were going on behind the scenes with it. And then not to mention the founder is involved in, it looks like, 3 malpractice lawsuits that are going on right now. Yeah, just a whole lot of sketchy stuff with the company.
And wasn't there a Harvard doctor involved with this as well?
Yeah. So this is, it's sad because I don't know, you can call it sad or not, but this entire thing is going to be, I think, pinned on Surgisphere and the founder of Surgisphere. But the other authors of the study, the lead author is a Harvard physician, and and the rest of the team is very prestigious. This founder is just one member of that team who participated in the study, but he wasn't the lead author. And if you're a prestigious lead author, wouldn't you review the data that you're putting your name behind and probably one of the most controversial and largest impact studies in the whole pandemic? Like, how could you not? And so yeah, it was like the whole, and so what we're seeing now is everyone is shifting the blame, right? Because now the study's been retracted. It was formally retracted yesterday. And there's actually, in the New England Journal of Medicine also put out a study using the same database, Surgisphere, same author. So these authors had 2 cracks at it to go through this data and determine something fishy was up. And they failed both times. The first article is just about basically cardiovascular effects of COVID-19 using their massive database and stuff. So that study was retracted by New England Journal of Medicine yesterday as well. But what you have is you have the World Health Organization. If you look at kind of the largest impact organizations down to the lowest, the World Health Organization impacted the world and said that they stopped those trials based on the results of this Lancet study. And you have the chief scientist of the World Health Organization just tweeted yesterday saying, oh, well, we don't have time to really read every study that's published. And so, we just rely on the authenticity of our sources. So basically saying just outright, like, we didn't do any due diligence on this study. We left that to Twitter. Which, good job, guys.
It's the exact opposite of Bitcoin.
Right.
Trust, don't verify.
Right, exactly. Exactly. And so they're just putting it on. So the World Health Organization is saying the Lancet, basically like, oh, well, we trusted the Lancet, and they dropped the ball on this one. And then you have the Lancet, who is basically saying, well, no, look, the authors, we trust the authors. The attestation on the article said that Dr. Mehra, the lead author, as well as Dr. Patel, another author, had access to the data and attested to the accuracy of it. So it's the author's fault. And then the authors, they're the ones that kind of put out the retraction letter, and they're sitting there saying, well, no, look, the founder of Surgisphere won't give us access to the data to do the internal audit, so it's his fault. And then the Surgisphere guy is sitting there saying, oh, well, I get the de-identified data from the hospitals. I don't even know where the data comes from. So so apparently no one's to blame. Just this whole study came out of no real data.
Yeah, and it's so perplexing, right? Is it incompetence or straight up malice? Like, was the World Health Organization looking to just check a box like, hey, this study exists in the Lancet, and once that happens, we can say, all right, drop hydroxychloroquine as a a treatment for this virus. It seems like, I mean, just as an observer and throughout this whole ordeal with this drug particularly, it seems like they've just been looking for reasons to get it off the table.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's enough information out there where everyone can kind of connect the dots themselves. But, if it's truly just negligence, like to get through that many professional organizations that do this for a full-time job and missed it, whereas, community on Twitter essentially was where a lot of this, this investigation actually developed and matured, figured out this study was a total sham in a matter of days. I put out my article, which is really not only my analysis and investigation to it, but it's actually, I got to give a ton of credit to my Twitter followers and the community on there is discussing this. I get so many messages every day of people saying, hey, did you look at this? Hey, did you know, she's an adult model? Did you know, blah, blah. And so it was really coming together of all that is the reason I put out an article on May 29th saying, a study out of thin air is what I called it. And it was basically a deep dive into Surgisphere. And so this was actually the first deep dive into Surgisphere that was ever written. There's really nothing out about them before this. And then I think 3 or 4 days later, The Guardian came out with a pretty good piece investigating Surgisphere. And then 2-3 days later, the article was retracted. But for Twitter to do the job of all these people, maybe that's a future of publications, like preprints with a decentralized peer review. I don't know.
I mean, I trust that more than what's being put out. What does this say about the state of the medical industry globally? Like, are these institutions like the World Health Organization, CDC, sort of is the curtain being drawn and the Wizard of Oz is being shown here, that these people really don't have as much control, or they may have perverse incentives than some may be led to believe?
Well, I mean, just look at the World Health Organization. What in this pandemic have they been right about? Like in any of their big kind of decisions or announcements, they've been essentially wrong. No human-to-human transmission. Oh, there is human-to-human transmission. No, you don't need travel restrictions. That's not going to help. Oh, actually, you should probably stop travel. Masks or no masks. They kind of seem to be vacillating a bit on that one. So I guess nowadays they're saying no masks. Hydroxychloroquine, the study, they've just been kind of, for an organization where this is your job, you had one job in a pandemic, and to fail this miserably at it, are they stupid? I mean, they're probably not stupid, right? So is there something higher that's going on? Maybe.
Yeah, I'm ready to go full Alex Jones on this one. Pushing the vaccines too. And so let's talk about the vaccines for a little bit. Like, we don't have a vaccine for the common cold, which is another coronavirus. Like, it seems that this coronavirus, COVID-19, has already mutated dozens of times, if I recall correctly.
There's some evidence for that. That's kind of a little bit up for debate still, but my suspicion is it has.
But do we need to wait for a vaccine before we can open up? Like, would a vaccine even be effective for this particular type of virus?
Yeah, so the common cold is kind of a collection of different viruses that people catch. They're just kind of all kind of lumped under the common cold. But yeah, there really isn't. There's not a vaccine for the common cold. There's flu vaccines, and everyone will admit that flu vaccines are only partially effective. There's not really randomized controlled trials of flu vaccines before they put them out every year. It's not like they have studied it and determined it's effective or not. They just kind of select strains of virus that are going around that seem to be gaining traction, and then put that in the vial, and then you get that flu vaccine. And so some years it seems like it's maybe effective, some it's not. So a coronavirus vaccine, it really isn't. There isn't one that exists. So I think a lot of people take for granted, say, oh yeah, no, they'll be able to make a vaccine. They can do anything. Two things. First of all, they can make a vaccine, but who knows if it works? There's probably not going to be very good randomized controlled trials on this vaccine before they start injecting people with it. And even if they are, let's say, able to successfully do this, there has to be safety studies. No one knows maybe how this vaccine will interact if you do catch the virus later, whether it can, make the illness worse for you, whether it has any effects on different viruses. Maybe it increases your risk of dying from the flu. There's just a lot of unknowns there. So with this, anticipation of having an effective vaccine in the next, 6 months or 9 months even is really not accurate. And if that does happen, I would really question the rigors of the safety and efficacy testing of that drug, of that vaccine. And so this idea of we're not going to open up until a vaccine comes is, I think, pretty crazy, because we don't know if it will come, and are we going to stay under lockdown for a year?
Yeah, it's again like the Alex Jones thoughts in my mind, like they're trying to control us. But it's like you mentioned, like secondary, tertiary effects of this vaccine, one of which being like how will it interact with other viruses. Didn't it come out that this year's flu shot actually made your chances of dying from COVID a bit higher, especially in Italy?
Yeah, so I've seen that that article and some commentary on that. I honestly didn't do a deep enough dive to determine how accurate that is, so I don't want to say anything that I don't fully know. But I did see that, and that could be true.
Yeah, regardless of this particular flu vaccine, what did make people more susceptible to mortality via COVID?
So it's definitely a possibility. Definitely a possibility.
Yeah, could be a side effect of these yearly vaccines.
Right, and then it becomes, in medicine you're always weighing the benefit and the harm, and so if the fatality rate of this disease is actually quite low, what's riskier? Injecting 200, 300 million people in the U.S. with a vaccine that's barely tested, or maybe taking a 0.1, 0.2% fatality rate? I don't know. I mean, that's going to be a decision.
Yeah, and this all gets back to incentives. This whole saga of hydroxychloroquine, profit incentives, particularly to me. At least this is what it seems like. Just I believe that Big Pharma wants to push drugs that will make them profit obscenely on the public instead of this generic drug. So as a doctor, what do you think of the current financial incentives that exist throughout the medical world? Like, do we need a restructuring of the way medicine is created, how it's patented, how much power these big pharma companies have, how much lobbying they're allowed to do, how much control they have over these organizations like the World Health Organization? Like, is there a need for mass disruption across the industry?
That is such a... The question is not hard. I would say yes, there does need to be a big change. What that change would look like, and the effects of doing one thing and how that kind of affects the whole rest of the space or the free market and all this other stuff is tough. And so I don't know, but there needs to be big changes, because you have there's a lot of conflicts of interest at the World Health Organization level and the CDC level between big pharma and politics. It's obvious. If you look at almost any of these higher up people who have relations with the World Health Organization or are tweeting about hydroxychloroquine negatively, just Google search Gilead plus their name. It almost always comes up. They were either funded by Gilead at some point, or they did research for them or something along those lines. Not always, but a lot of the time. Am I saying that they are now, acting in bad faith? No, not always, but there are conflicts of interest there that I think can't be ignored.
Yeah. Yeah, and Bill Gates would certainly make a lot of money if a vaccine came out.
And so exactly. So you have these people that can profit immensely, and then also in control of politics in some way, or close friends with people that are. And so you have a kind of a tight-knit group where they have a kind of a license to almost do whatever they want.
Yeah. It's really weird that Bill Gates has become like a virus expert and vaccination expert, sort of out of nowhere. Went from Microsoft to vaccining the world.
Well, computer viruses, human viruses.
Well,
Maybe you should stop the computer viruses first, right?
Exactly. Yeah. If we're going to use heuristics here, we should probably not give him control of human viruses, because
Maybe let Apple take care of that or something.
Right?
Yeah. The human viruses.
And it seems like things are changing. Trump has decided to walk away from the World Health Organization, correct?
Yeah. It looks like he formally announced that last week. So yeah, he's putting pressure on these organizations in one way or another. It's going to be interesting to see the long-term effects of it. But yeah, he's shaking things up, that's for sure.
Yeah. And no, because it's crazy to see people have been getting canceled left and right. Like the 2 doctors in California came out with that YouTube video. They got scrubbed.
Yeah.
Alex, is the last name Brenson?
Yeah, Brenson. Yeah.
He just got censored by Amazon, but then they uncensored him.
Did they uncensor him? I didn't see the follow up on that.
I think they wound up.
Elon Musk came to the rescue, right? I think Elon
again.
Musk commented on Alex Brenson's post saying that was unbelievable, and then tagged Jeff Bezos.
Yeah. And it's
yeah. So
let's get into the topic of censorship.
Yeah.
Like, again, your Google Doc was censored. These doctors are getting censored from YouTube. Susan Wojcicki, the CEO of YouTube, came out and said anything against the World Health Organization is going to get scrubbed, including people telling others to take vitamin C. It's like, what the fuck is going on?
I know. So, I think for a lot of us who are in the, very familiar with Bitcoin, the Bitcoin space, we're very familiar with censorship and what's going on. And a lot of, kind of well-known people have gotten kind of canceled on and off, or, suspended from Twitter or YouTube or Facebook or other social media platforms. But I think it really became more apparent during this pandemic when these social media platforms took such an aggressive stance on it. So, like you said, our Google Doc was, it's still, you can't see it. So it's pretty crazy. The first widely disseminated document on this potential treatment for coronavirus that triggered, hundreds of clinical trials worldwide. So even regardless whether you say it's effective or not, there's very, very smart, well-known scientists and physicians out there that stand behind this treatment, and there's others on the other side of the table saying it doesn't work, but it's still up for debate. You can't even view that original Google document because it's still down per Google, which is unbelievable. And then you have the Bakersfield doctors. So they were a couple of doctors at an urgent care center that did a little video, a YouTube video. It wasn't little, it was like an hour long or so. But they're basically looking at, in their testing in their center, they determined that the actual prevalence of COVID-19 is higher than people were anticipating based on, COVID-19 PCR testing. And the media attacked them and said their approach was flawed. It was irresponsible for them to announce that, and YouTube pulled down their video. And this is actually a video Elon Musk tweeted out. So Elon Musk actually has two strikes against him when it comes to censorship. He tweeted out our Google document, which the Google document was terminated, and then he tweeted out these Bakersfield doctors YouTube video, which was then censored. So he has a knack for finding content that the media doesn't want out there, apparently.
Elon, don't retweet this episode.
Yeah. You'll be like even more famous for like 24 hours, and you'll be gone.
The Streisand effect will come into play.
Yeah.
Who knows?
But it's crazy. Like what these doctors said actually essentially became kind of the predominant thought was, oh yeah, okay, this COVID-19 is more infectious and widespread than we thought. It is. This serology testing isn't actually that unreliable. It is fairly reliable. And so yeah.
Well, I was going to say, and then they talked a lot of sense about virology and immunology.
Right, yeah.
we do need exposure to these viruses to some extent if we ever want to build immunity. You can't sterilize the world.
Right.
It'll make things worse in the long run.
Right. And so these are qualified physicians who are speaking very reasonably. This isn't, even some crazy thing, which I'm not a fan of censorship in really almost any case, but it's something that's unbelievable that they were pulled down from each. So that's why I actually created the website Medicine Uncensored, which is where the first place I published my investigation into Surgisphere. It's because I thought that was critical during this pandemic for the right information to get out there. And so that's why I have. And so you have the Bakersfield doctors. You have another well-known doctor that was saying something the media didn't like, and he was pulled off, I think, Facebook for that, or YouTube again, I think. But yeah, like you said, it's been a super aggressive stance by YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Twitter, they seem to be the most free out of the three. If you look at Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, it seems to be the free. I really, really hope it stays that way, because I think there's a lot of good intellectual content and dissenting opinions that are circulated on Twitter, at least from my experience throughout this pandemic. And so, I really would hope that, Twitter's leadership, Jack Dorsey, would try to maintain that freedom. And yeah.
There's a lot of pressure for him not to.
I know. It's going to be, it's, I don't know. We'll see how it plays. I think that's going to be, so one thing I'd say is going to be a very big, whether you want to call it narrative or focus over the next couple of years, is this idea of censorship resistance. We now, social media platforms really almost, they kind of dominate the way people communicate now. And so if you're, maybe 5 years ago, you were no longer able to, you couldn't tweet out what you were having for breakfast or whatever. That was like, oh, okay, maybe that's not that big of a loss. But now, that's, predominant way of people getting their news, of spreading their word. You're no longer standing with a big microphone in the streets or whatever, as you maybe did 100 years ago. You're communicating on these platforms. And so when you lose that, you're effectively being silenced. And you can say you can just go to another platform, but as and anyone that's built a reputation on it, if you get canceled from let's say YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and then as in the case with Brenson, Amazon won't sell your book, it's going to be really hard to get your message out there. Like, how are you going to do it? You can't even sell a book now other than Amazon, basically. Go up to the local bookstore and say, here's my book. Yeah,
that's a huge debate that's raging right now. Like, do these private companies owe us these liberties? Nick Carter made a good case for it the other week, I think. Like you mentioned, like building a reputation with a particular namespace, like at Marty Bent. Like, I've built a reputation over the last 9 years on this site, and it feels like a property that I own and have tended to for quite some time.
Sure.
And it would suck to get that ripped away from me.
I think that there's a lot of people out there that would rather move to a different, like, let's say they had the option, like, because people, to move to a different country or lose all of their, social status or standing on these platforms or career. I think, a lot of them would be like, okay, well, I could move to a different country like that. I can maybe rebuild my life quicker there than trying to start from scratch in social media and maybe a whole different obscure channel. The other thing that's interesting is the debate between whether they're publishers or platforms. And so, right now these social media platforms are really protected from liability because they're supposedly a platform for just, discussion. But once they get into once they start aggressively censoring or making their own commentary on certain content, are they moving more into the publisher space, which then comes with a whole different liability? I think it's a very important topic, and I think this idea of censorship will be a recurring theme over the next few years.
Yeah, Section 230 is the big contention right now. If that gets taken, they become publishers, and you don't want to see that. And that's like the fucked up thing is like the blue check marks are bringing their own demise.
Yeah, I know. Like, I'm now a blue check mark. I'm one of those guys, man.
But everybody wanting to censor Trump, it's like, all right, I know you hate him and you want to do it, and he says some stupid things sometimes, but you're really digging everybody's grave if you try to make a point with him particularly.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, like, I would hate for these platforms to be labeled as publishers. Like, that would I think kill them pretty quickly, honestly. Maybe that'd be that chance for them to be born in a different way. That it could be very quickly replaced. I don't know. But I think that, staying a platform with uncensored content is the goal in my mind.
Yeah. First they came for Milo.
Yeah.
And I said nothing. But no, sadly, I think censorship's going to be a huge topic, but the entropy's already started.
Yeah.
The entropy on free speech on these platforms. So hopefully we can find an alternative over time. But again, that'll take time. Twitter took well over a decade to cement itself as, I've said it many times on this podcast, Twitter's the best communication tool that's ever existed. And the fact that I was able to follow your research on Twitter, DM you, like, hey, let's have a conversation. It's incredible.
Crypto is what brought me to Twitter. I had no interest in Twitter until 2015, 2016, where because I started on Bitcoin Talk. So 2013, 2014, I was on the Bitcoin Talk forums. That's where I thought a lot of the newest content came from. But then, in 2015, 2016, I realized it's actually Twitter where you have a lot of the intellectual discussion on this, especially when they expanded the number of character limits on each message. I think that was huge for facilitating more intelligent conversation on there. And now I think it's funny. If you look at journalism, a lot of journalists, reporters, their references are often tweets, right? That's like what they're doing.
And my newsletter is mainly references.
Right.
Tweets.
It's like, that's the content now. You don't really leave your computer like, oh, okay, this guy tweeted this. It's very interesting. In this comment, I'm going to write an article about that tweet. And so if you want to go to the source, it's right there. It's public. You can see it. And so I think that's been great for crypto, Bitcoin. It's been great for COVID-19, and I think it'll continue to be great for anything that's a hot topic where research can advance it.
Yeah. I guess we should end it on what I know you probably haven't had a lot of time to pay attention to it, but what are your current thoughts on Bitcoin, the state of the network, the market structure? What are you looking at particularly, if anything?
Gosh, I would say, I'm just going to keep it super, super high level, but I think with this pandemic and the way they're printing money and whether they have to do that again in the fall, if a lot of the fear comes back and the stock market economy takes a hit, and if they're even printing more money, I think that long term this is very good for Bitcoin, as we all know. It has some ups and downs price wise. If we're going to just talk about price, the fall, it could again have a little a spike down if the COVID-19, either if there really is a true second wave or if there is enough concern of one. But in the long run, I think it's gonna be a phenomenal 2 to 3 years for Bitcoin. Phenomenal.
I do as well.
We might be biased. I don't know, but I think that
definitely this is a Bitcoin podcast. But I wear my bias on my sleeve.
That's right. Hydroxychloroquine on this one and Bitcoin on this one.
Well, I think you gave a very unbiased view of. You gave both sides.
That's why I like to come in these podcasts. I like to do a little bit because sometimes you don't catch the nuances on Twitter. So a lot of people are like, oh, he's just like 100% one thing, and there's a lot more nuances to it.
There's so much nuance in every subject, even these riots right now.
Yeah.
But we won't get into that. Before we wrap up here, do you have any final thoughts, parting notes for the freaks out there on COVID-19, hydroxychloroquine, the research you're doing, medicine uncensored? It's got a very good Drudge vibe.
Drudge is no longer kind of, I think, getting the news out there that isn't already mainstream like it was a year ago. So that was also one of the things that caught my attention. Is I think that people are very familiar with the Drudge format, but no longer go to Drudge for that content that they were previously looking for. That's very interesting. But like we say with Bitcoin, do your own research, and it applies to Bitcoin. It applies to COVID-19. I mean, if you're sitting there reading headlines and that's how you're making your decisions on whether you wear a mask or whether you go out or go to the park or go to the beach, then you're probably gonna be not living your life the right way. But if you actually really care where any of these these kind of different choices impact your lives, then do your own research. Find the content out there that's not being just pushed by the mainstream narrative.
I would co-sign that message. Imagine how wrong they are about Bitcoin, and then start applying that to other subjects.
That's going to be yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. That was eye opening for me. A year or two ago was they're this wrong about Bitcoin. You can't, and it's so whatever any specialist that reads the news says, oh my gosh, they're wrong on it, which makes you think that what are they right about?
Right? Exactly. Well, Dr. Todaro, I really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you for doing the work that you're doing. It's very important and brave work in a time when you could easily be canceled. So thank you for jumping to the front lines on this battle for sanity.
Thanks so much, Marty, for having me. Have a great rest of your morning.
You as well. That's all we got today, freaks. Peace and love.